Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Libor, for your kind introduction. Thank you all for coming, for joining us, whether physically or virtually. We are going to talk, me and Natália are going to talk about the challenges involved in teaching medical Latin for international students. Specifically, we are going to focus on students' lack of motivation and the possible remedies for this problem. Before I actually get to the topic of context-based learning, I would like to introduce the course that we teach a little bit. So, basic medical terminology is a 2-semester course that is compulsory for all first-year students of general medicine and dentistry. Apart from that, medical Latin is also taught in the bachelor study program of physiotherapy. This time it's just 1-semester course. And of course, last but not least, we've got this tutorial, which is a course designed to help weaker students, essentially those who do not catch up with class regularly. In the English program, there are around 200 students per year, which, as you see in the chart here, this is almost twice as high the number in the Czech program, actually, and in one study group, we teach regularly about from 15 to 20 students, which is, believe me, the maximum that we can effectively manage, really. We have about from 12 to 14 study groups per year. The students come from all over the world, from countries across Europe mainly, but also from Asia, rarely from the US or Africa. So obviously they come from very different backgrounds, and the absolute majority of them use English as a lingua franca, as their second language. May I move on? Oh, I think this is next slide. Okay, next slide, please. It should have worked like this, but it doesn't work anymore. Fine. Do we prefer presentation or streaming?
Klikám.
It seems to be the case that we may need technical support.
Když to asi na to vykašli, já to zkusím prostě takhle. No. Takhle. Nejde totiž.
It's stuck. Here we are. Here we are. Fine. Okay, perhaps the streaming doesn't function anymore, but hopefully they will fix that in a minute. So, at this point I'd like to focus on the specifics of this course. So what is specific about this course, I mean in comparison with other language courses for specific purposes, is that we do not have to go on with language of everyday communication, which means that we can fully focus only on field-specific vocabulary. Great. So the main aim of the course is to provide students with the understanding of the principles of Latin-based anatomical nomenclature plus Greek-based clinical terminology, together with the basics of pharmacological nomenclature. As far as the grammatical instruction is concerned, it is very limited. It simply covers only phenomena that are necessary to understand and correctly apply this terminology, which means the system of cases in particular. Anyway, the teacher is faced with other challenges also that are related, of course, to the diversity of the individual study groups, which are by nature multicultural and therefore multilingual. Our main job is simply to explain medical terminology based on Latin, which is the former lingua franca, using by means of English, which is the modern or current lingua franca. This obviously somewhat complicates the learning process, not least because of the fundamental typological difference between these two languages. So whereas Latin is a synthetic, that is inflectional language, English is obviously not. It's an analytic or isolating language, and this causes trouble. The thing is that students constantly have to bear in mind two non-native language platforms, which are radically different in terms of morphology. Apart from that, these platforms sometimes differ from their native languages also in terms of the writing system, which is typically the case with the Japanese students,
who quite frequently take notes in seminars using their original logographic symbols and only consequently turn that into the English, or sorry, into the Latin alphabet. So this means that the number of mental steps they have to make while processing information provided in class is really extremely high. At the same time, it is the international and multicultural character that actually prevents us from tailoring study materials according to the needs of individual students, because this would not simply work for the whole group. We may try to look for parallel similarities between Latin, English and their native languages, but if we are such a great mixture of various nationalities within one group, this simply does not work. It makes no sense to try to do it. Yet another, and this time it's a really strongly discouraging factor that influences the teaching process of medical Latin, is the existence of numerous and quite misleading similarities and parallels between English and Latin, obviously. These are called so-called false friends. The thing is that the absolute majority of English terms naturally derive or come from Latin, and so students are very logically and naturally tempted to mix the two languages together, creating a sort of macaronic, unfortunately not verse, but rather macaronic terminology. So this is of course something that we do not want to have in class, and we need to break on this. Last but not least, if you could move on a little bit, thank you very much. Another thing that we need to cope up is diverse or rather sometimes insufficient knowledge of English, which is definitely not a general issue, but still there are students whose English is simply not good enough to follow instruction in class. They are not able to do various translation assignments or tasks where they are supposed to provide explanation of terms. So if they are not good in English, this obviously hinders their progress in Latin as well. And to be fair, we need to admit that we as teachers, of course, also lack professional medical expertise, which may obscure our instruction on certain issues. So as you see, the situation is rather complicated, and the question, of course, what we can do about students' lack of motivation. Thank you. And yes, the answer to this question has to do with what is called context-based learning, CBL approach, which is actually a rather broad topic. And this approach came to be developed and put into practice in the several decades ago. And in present, definitions and concepts vary from one country to another. So I would just like to mention perhaps the most famous approach is so-called CercleS approach, which originated in the UK and which could be summarized using Campbell's phrase from 1994 as follows. The most important single factor influencing learning is the active engagement of the learner with the material. Obtain this and teach by whatever method retain this engagement. So easy, isn't it? Okay, if we move on a little bit, we get to the US approach to CBL, which actually puts a lot of emphasis on what is called authentic evaluation, authentic assessment, which has different modes. You can use portfolios, you can use performances, you can use projects, and you can also use extended written tasks, which of course is not the case with medical Latin though. Generally speaking, the focus of CBL methodology is on the social and the real, that is practical context of the learning process, which essentially means the use of examples, both real or fictitious, in order to teach students through practical experience rather than theory only. So this is basically about telling the student why he's doing this, what the future benefit of this will be for him within future job. This is the social, really social context, and so on and so forth. To sum up, it's about student-centered learning, about the impact of learning. Fine. To get back to the title of our presentation, where we use the famous Latin proverb, Verba, movent, exempla, trahunt, which means words move people, but examples actually compel them. This was meant to illustrate what seems to be a general and quite long-standing trend towards practical training and authenticity in education, which is, in my view, evident, especially in natural sciences and medicine, of course. So an excellent output of this approach put into practice is, of course, the foundation of the Simulation Center of the Faculty of Medicine of Masaryk University, which shall be open in 1 month, I think, and welcome first students already this autumn. We'll see how that will look like. Anyway, it definitely offers a unique teaching environment for practical training that has been inspired by the principles of simulation medicine, and a lot of emphasis is put on the development of students' soft skills such as communication, decision-making, critical thinking, and teamwork. It's obvious that we as language teachers cannot really go that far as the Simulation Center, but in a sense we can come pretty close. If we can move to the other slide, what we want to do, or what we try to do, is to engage and motivate students using authentic medical materials of various kinds. We include medical reports, diagnosis, dissection protocols, and medical prescriptions. I have some examples here. These are just 2 authentic diagnoses. You see that the absolute majority of words are Latin words, a lot of abbreviations, of course, sometimes eponyms, dates, etc., etc. But the dominant language here is Latin, which is definitely not to say that each and every diagnosis that you can receive in a Czech hospital would be written in such an accurate and polished Latin. This is a matter of particular branches. If you go to midwifery or traumatology, surgery, the diagnosis will most probably be in Latin, but not everywhere. Fine, another example, Nati, of dissection protocol, again written in Latin, in accurate Latin more or less. So, what are the benefits of such documents used in classes? They are used to raise student interest because they give them extremely valuable insight into regular and everyday practice of real life doctors, as well as authentic clinical cases. Apart from that, they stimulate them to sort of synthesize knowledge or use knowledge that they acquire in other courses during their studies, be that anatomy or various clinical courses. So they have a place where they can use this knowledge, like put that together and use it further. Another thing which is important for us, especially as teacher, is that it makes the teaching less boring, let me put it this way, because it enables us to teach medical Latin more as a modern language rather than former lingua franca. The activities that we use these materials for we try to follow the principles of scaffolding. This means that we start from quite simple drill exercises and grammar practice, and we move on towards more complex or sophisticated tasks where students are supposed to be creative, intuitive, and really put knowledge from other courses together and come up with their solutions and argue for or against particular solutions. So this is what we do, and this is why the last thing here says that the instructive potential of authentic medical materials is enormous, and this is exactly where I'd like to stop and ask Natalie to go on and offer you some practical tips for teaching. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to present some particular activities and strategies that can be used based on these medical documentations, whether these are reports, dissection protocols, or prescriptions. To start with, all these types of activities should aim at some kind of active engagement of students in the teaching process. This can be done from the very first class, actually, when we show students for the first time how the medical documentation looks like, what kind of information is included, and what can they expect, and what is the potential outcome. The final aim is that they should be able to write short, simple medical reports of their own, and also passively understand more complex diagnoses. So here on the slide you see just some types of activities that can be used with students with medical reports. These are not only grammatical and translation exercises, but we can also later on, when students are more familiar with the concepts, we can ask them to solve more context-based tasks, such as telling us something about the circumstances of the case, or answering questions like, is this report referring to man or woman? What is the situation? What is the patient's anamnesis? So the two main sources we use for the instruction are the first one, medical reports under the corpus of authentic clinical diagnosis that are accessible by now only for us teachers in the Sketch Engine module, and the other source we use this time only in English is the free online platform of the New England Journal of Medicine, and here, among other things, we can find plenty of case studies together with descriptions, x-rays, pictures, so students can get the whole picture of the case, not just the medical report itself. So first of all, I'm going to show you some examples of activities that can be done with the corpus of authentic clinical diagnosis. It's by no means exhaustive, so of course there can be other things done too. So first of all, if I show students for the first time medical report, before any grammatical instruction, I always emphasize that, or try students to think about what is the structure of the medical report, what kind of information should be included, how specific the information should be, what should be the order of the information. So for example, here on the slide you see 5 samples of fracture-related medical reports, and students should be able to deduce that, yes, first of all, what is always included in the medical report is the type of pathology, injury, fracture, and so on. The second information usually includes localizing the injury. And again, here I can instruct them on what are the ways of localizing the injury, whether it is genitive or whether it is derived adjective. And of course, they also encounter for the first time the typical abbreviations and conventions. So for example, they learn later that when referring to which side the injury is on, there is certain professional convention about it. So it's not just about language practice, but also about instructing students about what are the professional conventions of writing a report. Of course, then, if we instruct students in one of the topics about the basic injury types, of course, again, we can go to the corpus and select whatever term we want to demonstrate. And important thing is that we can show students the most frequent, statistically most frequent occurrences. So for example, we can show them that if we speak about distorsio, what are the typical locations of such an injury? And of course, this can be also used for creating test items, because of course it's much better than just teacher trying to make up potentially good examples to exercise some grammatical phenomenon. So it's better to have a look in the database and see what really is the most frequent use, where the injury appears most frequently. So for example, with distorsio, we see that it often appears with knee, ankle, vertebral column area. Of course, other things can be done based on these reports to revise grammatical phenomena. So students can be asked to correct mistakes. They usually like to do that a lot. Of course, it's a little bit, sometimes a little bit demotivational, because students will tell us that, yeah, the doctors make mistakes and it still works. But of course, we want them to be better than those who wrote the diagnosis. And of course, they can identify grammatical phenomena, or they can be asked to, let's say, shift singular to plural, vice versa, create a synonymous expression, give an opposite. So various things can be done. Plus abbreviations, of course, first of all, students can be asked to think about what the abbreviation refers to. So for example, if we have the distorsio ATC here, they could think about what this could refer to based on their anatomical knowledge, and if they know that already in English, they can later give us full form, preferably in a correct full form in Latin. In some cases, we have confusing terms. So, for example, with distorsio and dislocatio, this gets often confused as for the meaning. So, again, a database could be used to demonstrate the difference in use. And even though dislocatio would be expected to be used with as in the first place of the report as a dislocation of some joint, when I looked in the database, actually the most common appearance was as a specification of a fracture. So it often appears as a fracture of something and with or without dislocation of the bone fragments. And again, students can be asked to give full forms of the abbreviations. You see, for example, in the first line that actually almost all of it could be just as well an English medical report, because the only Latin word which isn't full is basically the preposition sine. So if you replace it with without, you wouldn't even recognize that this is a Latin report. So in this way, we can show students that really, even though they are not using Latin writing reports in their native homelands, they still can benefit from these reports, because English terminology, as was already mentioned, is very much based on Latin. Last example of an activity from the corpus. What is usually the most problematic issue with students in the first semester is so-called third declension. So again, we can show them some occurrences and typical endings that belong to this group. So, for example, here in the first example, I chose words falling under third declension that are used in plural, and students are asked to come with the basic form, and they also see how the inflection works. That is, that usually in third declension, the nouns stem differs from the basic form, so they have to be careful about remembering how the word changes in genitive and then add the ending to that. The same can be done with neutrals to demonstrate the difference between neutrals and males, females. So in the second example, you see some selected reports that include neutral words falling under third declension, and students again could be asked to put these into plural, and for this they need to know, first of all, that they should use the stem, just like with the previous example, and unlike the previous examples, not as ending but a ending. Of course, some other things can be done too with the clinical terminology, not just grammar. So, I know about the time, I'll try to stick to the schedule. So they can be asked to explain or find terms that refer, let's say, to tumors. They should already know at that point that these terms always end in oma. So, and after that, they could also be asked to explain what kind of tumors these are. The second source I was talking about was the New England Journal of Medicine. So here you can find many articles, studies, and so on, but for us what is important are the case studies. So again, after putting a keyword, So for example, I want to give students some exercise on types of fractures. So I choose a type of fracture, I will write there in English, and several case studies come up. Then, of course, that requires a little bit more work because I need to select the relevant information. The description is usually quite long, so I just select what is really important. Good thing is that usually these include also X-rays, pictures, so that again enhances motivation. And students see the real picture and the real story behind the report, which again makes it more interesting, let's say. Usually they are supposed to transform the parts that I marked in advance into a Latin medical report. And I say transform deliberately because I always try to emphasize that they are not going to translate literally what is there. So for example, if you see the first sentence, complete amputation of his right knee leg directly below the knee, of course they are not going to translate some of the words. They are only trying to report or record the relevant information and keep the structure of the report based on the professional conventions. So they have to a little bit rephrase that sentence. Yeah, they will not, for example, translate his, they will not translate directly below, and so on. They will use other means of expression for this. And as already mentioned, we have two more kinds of medical documentation. The first one, this is just a sample of how we can use dissection protocol. So after having some instruction about the structure of this dissection protocol, students are given this sample and they're asked to answer some questions. Obviously, the first question would be, what was the cause of death of the deceased? And they should already know at that point that they should look for this only in the third point, not the first as we would expect. And this could also be used at the end of the second semester, usually when students are already familiar with word compiling principles. So as you see, there are plenty of compound words they can be asked to explain, and many of these basically have the same English equivalent. So it's not just enough that they will tell you metastasis, yeah, that's metastasis, but what is it? Or if you say bronchopneumonia, they should again explain what that means exactly. Last type of medical documentation involves medical prescriptions. So again, after having some instruction about what is the structure, the usual formulae and vocabulary in the prescription, they are given 2, 3, 4, as many as possible cases, where again they first of all need to be able to extract what is important from the story and then keep the structure and try to include all the necessary information. So nothing unnecessary, but they shouldn't omit anything. Then they're working with that for some time, and after they are finished, we can show them what the original prescription was, and we can compare what they did differently, or what can be discussed, or what can be used or expressed in a different way. And I think we are out of time, so should I conclude somehow, or? Okay, so to conclude, task-based learning and context-based learning with medical reports mostly and other types of these documents is very important for student motivation. It makes students think critically, not just translating the words literally. And of course, it gives the students more complex picture of the whole case or the real story behind what they see as just reports. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to your
I thank you, Natália and Maria, for your presentation. And I'm glad you stressed the importance of making the theoretical instruction linked to the medical practice. Don't have time for questions, but if you have a pressing question, just ask it immediately.
I have one question. Thank you very much for a very engaging presentation. I was very impressed. And my question is about pronunciation of Latin, particularly when you teach Latin to people whose first language is English. I suppose you have people like that. So do you actually force them to pronounce it in our way?
Yes.
Or yes. and how do they cope with it? They don't.
Yeah, like they're not like the focus is not on the pronunciation, but if they pronounce differently, at least I cannot speak for Masaryk, but I always try to tell them, yeah, this should be pronounced like that, because they are getting into contact with Czech teachers in other subjects. Yeah, and for example in anatomy, this could be a problem if they
right, because it's not usually intelligible. I mean, if you say it in the Czech way and in English, right?
There are more variants of Latin.
Words, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But teachers of anatomy actually complain that they do not understand them when they are using Latin.
So I think that's an
evidence. The same for us. Problem.
And sometimes there is a problem, for example, with students who already had Latin, like Germans or Italians, because they pronounce it in the Italian and German way, which is different from the Czech way. So they have to like relearn it again.
Right. Okay.
But usually it's not such a big problem.
So
not for us at least.
Right. So is that because I would say that if an Italian uses Latin, that would be the correct Latin.
No, they use the Italian pronunciation, so ch instead of t.
Right. So is there so Latin is Latin, and that's it. I just want to go to
Just more or less two basic types of pronunciation. One based on the restitutive, like supposed pronunciation as it was in ancient Rome, and the other one is the medieval one. The one that we are normally regularly using is medieval, the medieval pronunciation. However, earlier or later on, I think both of us sort of are satisfied with whatever Latin that the students speak, because it's really difficult for them. For Italians, they keep on pronouncing it as ch. Germans, they are sometimes used to the restitutive pronunciation. So as long as it's understandable, it's good, you know.
Okay, but Czech Latin, that's the way in the Czech Republic. Okay.
Yeah, like we have to remind them that this should be pronounced like this. But of course we understand them. Yeah, but that's not a problem for our course. It's only a problem. But in other courses it could be a problem.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Any other question? If not, I don't want to steal the time for lunch. And thank you again. I'm sure more questions can be asked later during the conference. Natália and Maria will be available here, I'm sure. So thank you again, and